keynote speech delivered by Governor of Bank Indonesia. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we will soon begin the session. For those of you who are still in the back of the seminar room, please kindly make your way to your seats. Or if you cannot find your seats, please make your way to the overflow room next to the seminar room. Once again, we kindly ask you to please be seated, or you can make your way to the overflow room next to the seminar room. All right, once again, ladies and gentlemen, we have a list of prominent speakers with expertise and in each of their individual expertise, and we will be led by none other than our moderator, prominent Indonesian journalist. All right, before we start, as I've mentioned before, we will have the keynote speech delivered by Governor of Bank Indonesia. So without further ado, His Excellency Mr. Peri Warjio, the stage is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. I should welcome my dear fellows, Governor Felipe Medara, Governor of Bangko Sentral of the Philippines, my dear friend joining us online, Mahendra Siregar, Chairman of Commissioner of Financial Service Authority, as well as my prominent speaker. I don't know, I call it Miss Ibu Mbak Satu Rahkonen, because you know Mbak, she is the World Bank country or director for Indonesia in Timor-Leste, who is close to us, as well as my dear fellow minister, governor, and deputies of ASEAN, ladies and gentlemen. First, and most of all, of course, we are delighted to have this second session on how we have to formulate an advanced, innovative strategy to further enhance financial inclusion. Well, I'm very touched. Every time I heard the word financial inclusion, it's always touched deeply in my heart. Why? The word financial inclusion always very close to MSME, medium, small, and micro economy, which is in Indonesia consists of close to 75 million units. We can count through ASEAN, which is ASEAN the home of MSME around the ASEAN. Look further. Who are doing the MSA? Who are doing the ME? 2/3 of MSE is women. So, MSME empowerment, inclusion is identically the same as empowerment woman. Look further. Who are the women that doing the MSME? They are advancing the MSME for supporting the family, for economic recovery. But beyond that, those women empowered MSME are also financing the schooling of their children. Many of them are passing not only high school, undergraduate, master, and one of them becoming the governor of Central Bank of Indonesia. You know that? And we have so many leaders around the ASEAN and Indonesia being raised by women empowerment in the village, And the MSE, this is why the word of financial inclusion always touch in my heart. Not only women empowerment, economic recovery, welfare of the family, but also bringing up many leaders of this country and ASEAN. So that's why Indonesian chairmanship under the ASEAN 2023, one of the things that we want to facilitate discussion and exchange views among the members, how to promote further and expand the MSME in the region. After last year, we are succeeding in bringing up the financial and economic inclusion to G20 under global partnership of financial inclusion. And the works of G20, not only Indonesia, but also Mexico, India, Italy, working together to bring up the MSME financial and economic inclusion to the G20. And now we are bringing up also as one of the important agenda on the ASEAN region. So, of course, the prominent speaker will talk much. Governor Pilipe will be talking Philippine experience. My dear friend, Pak Mahindra, talking about Indonesia experience. Of course, Ms. Satu will talking about how the World Bank leading role on this aspect. Let me just give you just three, food for thought on how we have innovative strategy to further enhance financial and I should say economic inclusion. One, promoting economic and financial inclusion, we have to develop the integrated ecosystem. Integrated ecosystem. Why? By definition, MSME, financial inclusion, economic inclusion, we're talking about small unit, small scale. Small scale cannot be developed if we cannot develop the integrated ecosystem. What do I mean by integrated ecosystem? Consists of clustering, making group of those MSME. This is the experience of Bank Indonesia. We have about close to 3,000 MSME that we developed among the 46 branches. Bringing all of this good clothes that we are putting here, so please buy those. So you have woman empowerment, economic inclusion by including also that I'm wearing one of the best product of MSME production of Bank Indonesia. So we have to have a cluster, a group of those MSME. So the economic scale can be increased. We need to give them technical assistance, entrepreneurship, production, how to use the product best. As well as also for this clothing, we also engage them with designer. So we have a fashion show every year around Indonesia to have a good production of MSME, but also marketing as well as financial access, ecosystem, group, end-to-end. But we are also giving more, of course, affirmative policy on those MSME development. Affirmative policy in Indonesia, we have a national strategy for MSME development. But we also giving them with fiscal incentive, interest rate subsidy for kredit usaha rakyat. Bank Indonesia also giving incentive for those SMSE. My friend and the Financial Service Authority, OJK, also giving incentive. So one, we have to bring about ecosystem of MSME end-to-end, grouping and giving them with positive affirmative policy incentive from the government, central bank, financial service authority, and everybody. That's number one. Number two, for economic and financial inclusion, this is also being experienced in Indonesia over the past 3 years, that economic and financial inclusion can be accelerated through harnessing digitalization. This is the experience of Indonesia. Since 2019, we are digitalized our economy. We are introducing QR Indonesian standard, KRIS. This is last year, 30 million, 80% of them are MSME. This year targeted 45 million, about the same, 80% of 45 million MSME. But we still need to audit then. So I call my dear fellow on the payment system industry, the banking, reach out. We still have about 65 million that need to be reached out. QR Indonesian standard, fast payment, marketplace, fintech, payment system, and also in Indonesia, we are delivering social program through digitalization. Electronification of social program, electronification of local government transaction, mode of transaction. So we are digitalized everything on the economic and financial inclusion. So harnessing digitalization is the fast growing for promoting economic and financial inclusion. But we have to go further on that. For member state of the ASEAN, the need for national digital payment system for development in each country. Digital payment ID, this is also important. How then we can generate those data, sound data for MSME to be developed further, incorporating credit scoring and promoting for financing. Of course, with pay due regard to public and private data privacy, as well as innovation solution to support access to finance, such as developing credit scoring, and of course, cross-border cooperation of the payment system, and the first session through regional payment connectivity of the ASEAN 5 and ASEAN. This is also promoting, harnessing digitization for promoting economic and financial inclusion. Third, last point, promoting digital financial literacy and customer protection. This is very important. Most of the MSME, of course, need to be advanced in their understanding about financial product, financial services, how to reach out those financial product, financial services through digitalization. And we know how actually the problem of the digitalization, one of the things, of course, the technology and innovation also relating to fraud, cyber security, data privacy, as recent study by consultative group to assist the poor also testify there is a problem on that aspect. So I think ASEAN can leverage this aspect through global best practice to benefit our region, to enhance digitalization, as well as to also protect our customer financial literacy. And last year, I think under Indonesian chairmanship, we already have advanced the discussion on leveraging from G20 presidency on the delivery of financial inclusion framework in harnessing digitization to increase productivity, sustainability, and increase economy for women, youth, and MSME, including the implementation guide for G20 high-level principle for digital financial inclusion. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give our hand and our heart for economic and financial inclusion in ASEAN and in the world. One, by developing ecosystem. Two, by harnessing digitalization. And the third, of course, enhancing financial literacy and customer protection. Those, my dear fellow speaker, will dwell into detail. Have a good and fruitful seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Please kindly remain on stage, sir, as we will have another photo session. We would like to invite Governor Felipe Medalla, Deputy Governor Dodi Budi Waluyo, Assistant Governor Dianingsih Hendarta, all speakers and moderator. And I would also like to see if Mr. Mahendra Siregar is available to turn on your camera, sir, as we will put you on the screen as well here in the seminar if you want, sir. Your Excellencies, please, you may return to your seats. All right, distinguished guests, this afternoon we will have a very interesting panel discussion on the topic of how to develop and implement financial inclusion strategy to promote and to sustain the inclusive economy as well as the digital finance. But before we start the panel discussion, allow me to share a bit of background from our moderator for today, Mr. Timothy Marbet. He is a senior news anchor of Kompas TV, owned by one of Indonesia's largest media group. And for the last 16 years, Mr. Timothy has produced many prominent programs, including the 2014 presidential debate. So without further ado, let us give a warm welcome to Mr. Timothy Marbet.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to be here with you today in front of a very illustrious audience here. And also, I'm proud to be sitting with very prominent speakers that we have today that I believe will provide us very valuable insights on what is said to be a very timely topic that we will have today. Governor Perry in his keynote speech has also illustrated that the momentum has never been better for us, most of all after we faced a global pandemic, to realize that we need to promptly address the issue of financial inclusion. And not only that we need to, but we are now able to, thanks to digitalization. Now, technology has provided us with unprecedented tools to reach our goals in providing financial inclusion to those who were most difficult to reach in the past. The speakers will have so much more to say on this topic, innovative strategy to further enhance financial inclusion. So ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to read out a short introduction, very short compared to what they have done. So I'll just read a very brief introduction and invite the speakers on stage. Our first speaker is the chairman of the Board of Commissioners of the Financial Services Authority, or OJK, for the 2018-2023 period. And prior to that, he has served as the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and also was the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia for the United States. He obtained a Master of Economics from the Monash University in Melbourne and a Bachelor of Economics from Universitas Indonesia. Joining us online is Mr. Mahendra Siregar. Pak Mahendra, let's give a round of applause to Pak Mahendra Siregar. Thank you, Pak Mahendra, for joining us today, and I believe you, as much as we wish that you could be here in the beautiful island of Bali. Pak Mahendra.
Next time.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Mahendra. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is the Governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Filipinas, is a seasoned economist and educator whose career spans for more than 4 decades and 4 administrations. He has been a member of the Policymaking Monetary Board since July 2011, having been appointed by former President Benigno Aquino III and President Rodrigo Duterte. Dr. Medalla earned his PhD in economics from the Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and his MA in economics from the University of the Philippines. Please welcome Mr. Felipe M. Medalla. Thank you very much for joining us today, Governor. Please have a seat. And our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is the World Bank Country Director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. She oversees the Youth Bank's program in the two countries and leads policy dialogue with government counterparts, civil society, and also other parties or partners. Prior to this position, she was the World Bank Country Director for Moldova, Belarus, and Ukraine. Ms. Kakonen, Ibu Kakonen, as Pak Peri said, or Mbak Kakonen. Pak Peri is the only one that could call you Mbak, I guess. We call you Ibu Satu, is the author of 3 books on economic development and has published numerous economic reports and research papers. Ms. Kakonen holds a PhD in economics from the University of Pennsylvania, where she studied as a Fulbright scholar and a Magister of Science from the Helsinki School of Economics. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ibu Satu Kakonen. Satu, we've been doing a lot of events for the last 2 years, all online, so it's very nice to meet you here in Bali, Bu Satu. Ladies and gentlemen, as stated earlier, digitalization has provided the tools we need to advance our reach of financial inclusion. But going digital alone is not enough. More innovative approaches can strengthen the impact of this, and we seek in financial inclusion individually and also, as stated, to MSMEs. This is to help boost their productivity and also their resilience in future economic shocks. Now, we cannot forget that digitalization has also led to new risks, especially where digital and financial literacy is low. Now, how can we harness the power of digitalization in finance and also mitigate the risk? These are the few questions we hope to be answered, or at least addressed in our talk today. I'm sure we're still looking for the answer here together. Now, I would like to give the time to the speakers to elaborate their presentation. We will have 10 minutes, around 10 minutes for each speaker. And please allow me to kindly remind each speaker when your time is up. I would like to give the first chance to Pak Mahendra Siregar. Pak Mahendra, the time is yours.
Thank you, Timothy. First of all, thank you, Governor Peri Warjio and the organizer for having me to this important event. Timothy, I think it's important for us to look at the most recent development in the global financial sector to put the most relevant updated version of what we need to learn from the current lesson and to improve the situation and the resilience going forward. Well, as illustrated by Governor Peri Warjio, Indonesia faces a challenging or continuous challenge in continuing the increase of its population access to financial industry, or the financial inclusion and literacy, as we call it. And on that note, it is important to be updated that we have achieved an encouraging development to see that last year, the financial literacy rate has increased to almost 50% from just below 40% in 2019. Meanwhile, the financial inclusion rate has increased from around 73% in 2019 to 85% last year. And that certainly put Indonesia on the right track to achieve the government's target of 90% financial inclusion rate by 2024. Now, while that is becoming more even relevant, I think we understand the second point I would like to make is that in addition to banks and multi-finance companies, many of the progress of this financial inclusion and literacy in increasing the access to the population, including the MSMEs, are done by the digital technology-based companies or startups. These companies, as we know it, were very much supported by an abundant flow of investment with very low cost of capital before last year, mostly because the excess liquidity in the global capital market that generated by the policies of the advanced nations, central banks in the quantitative easing, as well as, of course, the counter-cyclical fiscal policies of the same governments during the COVID period, the pandemic time. Now, in the last 12 months, this has changed dramatically. Interest rates in the US and Europe have increased sharply to combat inflationary pressure. And as a result, startup investors with a lot of liquidity are no longer there, are no longer available. So digital technology startups, and including in that fintech, have to compete in a more competitive capital market. And because of that, they need to be more prospective in their business proposition. They need to improve their GRC, the governance, risk and compliance, their transparency, and of course, their profitability. So now the bottom lines are much more important than just valuation prospect, unlike in the old days, in the good old days of the startups. But this is the new reality that they have to face. Now, the third point is that on the other side of the coin, banks and financial companies that lend or used to lend money to this sector face a big risk of mismatch of interest rates, of tenure within the asset liability management, as well as the risk of too heavily concentrated in specific sector. So they have to improve their prudential, their asset liability management conduct. And as we have seen just 2 weeks ago, the mismatch of various factors that I've mentioned had brought down the Silicon Valley Bank, and also to a much lesser extent, a few other banks in the US. So with this lesson learned, I think it's very obvious now regulators, including OJK, have to become more vigilant in balancing and navigating between upholding very important prudential principles of banking and financial companies, and at the same time, also to secure the stability of the financial system. So that is obviously a big lesson learned that we have just received in the last 2 weeks. But at the same time, we need to continue having the digital startups, the fintech companies, to contribute further to the financial inclusion and financial literacy that we are enjoying some of the achievement already. But in order to do that, we need to improve the prudential aspects. And of course, with that, the regulatory and the supervisory aspects of this digital-related sector, including also to promote consolidation between startups and companies so that they would have better resilience with regard to the turbulence that they are facing from the investors' perspective. because by doing that, then we can hope we would continue expect the benefit of the innovative and creative contribution that these industries have been playing up to now. As a regulator, OJK specifically are responsible for various fintech industries. We also regulate and supervise the peer-to-peer lending industry. We also regulate and supervise the securities crowdfunding industry that use the capital market as its way to raise funds. So we are watching and improving continuously the supervision, the regulatory, and of course the GRC and resilience of these companies, while at the same time we want to secure the prudential and the soundness of our banking and financial conventional financial industries, which is of course very important for our stability of financial system. So this is what we are trying to do, and I think this is also somewhat innovative policies that we want to promote further, because we have to ensure the continuity and the soundness of the two sectors jointly. Last point, at the same time, we must also improve the consumer protection that have been, of course, been threatened even in a greater extent through the illegal activities taken place online, as well as some aspect related to cybersecurity. So it's a more complex world, certainly, but it does not mean that we don't have the capacity and the initiatives and capability to address that in a good balance. I stop here. Thank you.
Interesting point there, but well, we like looking at the numbers, as you stated in the beginning. Financial literacy and also inclusion is increasing. Of course, there's much more to be done here. Now, next, we'd like to hear how it is in the Philippines. Therefore, Governor, the time is yours.
Guest financial inclusion champions, ladies and gentlemen, salamat siya. Of course, the first thing I'd like to do is thank Governor Perry and our Indonesian host for hosting such a wonderful event. On behalf of the Philippine Central Bank, thank you for inviting me to share Philippine experience on harnessing digital technologies to reinforce financial inclusion, a topic very important to us in the central bank, and especially the monetary board. Indeed, although we are, in a sense, a very traditional central bank that's very concerned about price stability, which of course right now is always putting us in the headlines because we're missing the targets. The financial stability and, of course, a safe and efficient payment system. But all of these strong three pillars, it will be a pity if it's not inclusive. Okay, so we have made, the Bangko Sentral has made financial inclusion as a very important part of strategic objectives for the next so many years. As you might have already heard, our target is to increase the proportion of people who are included in the financial system. That is, they have a formal bank account or electronic wallet to 70% onboarded to the financial system by this year. The other way to put it is we want to reduce the number of excluded people to below 30. By the way, it started as 71% excluded. The 2021 number is now 44, and we're certain that the 2023 numbers are much lower, and we are on our way towards 30% or lower excluded. We are actively working to bring the figure down, and COVID sped up the process, but I think there's no stopping us. Of course, there are limits because of the infrastructure itself. There are a big part of the population that has no access to even cell phone signals in some cases. So we have to find other ways of reaching them. Okay. So e-money has played a big role. E-money accounts grew to 36% in 2021 and much higher now. And in the aspect of consumer protection and fraud, fortunately were finally able to pass a law that requires every prepaid SIM card to have a verified ID. And by the way, I tried it myself. I bought a SIM card, uploaded my ID, which was a national ID, and took a selfie of myself. And it took them only 3 days to send me a text note saying, "You've been verified." Of course, maybe they found out I was central bank governor. That's why they were passed. But I don't know, but I don't think so. So then I opened, I will not say what kind, whether it's GCash or it's Maya. I opened another account and was able to do so very quickly. So it's working, and since the number of people who use their mobile phones has increased significantly, that's why we are actually quite confident that we will be able to succeed, maybe even going as if we can improve the physical infrastructure, maybe even go below 30, that's excluded. Excluded, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, of course, from the point of view of the government, it is a whole of government approach, and the national strategy for financial inclusion is not just the central banks, it's the entire government. Okay, so now, as I already alluded to, there are issues, of course. You have a digital telecoms divide, and that has to be addressed. And there's quite now, so what we're doing now is say, well, satellite services will no longer be needed to be part of telecoms franchises. If some of the areas are underserved, any entrepreneur could come up and put up a VSAT or something so that they can increase access to internet in those places that are underserved. Okay, so in addition, of course, we are creating an enabling regulatory environment, and consumer protection is one of them. Again, fortunately, we were able to pass a law that literally turned an office in the central bank as a court, the decisions of which can be challenged only at the Court of Appeals, which is just one level below the Supreme Court. Of course, because with these powers, it can force very fast mediation. And we hope we never get there with somebody from the central bank who acts like a judge makes a ruling whether who's at fault and the extent to which the consumer has, in the case the bank is wrong, the banks, of course, have to make the consumer whole. So these are and of course, we have programs that we are trying to, of course, improve financial literacy. My own experience with it is sometimes financial literacy problem is also arithmetic problem. Sometimes some people just couldn't solve very simple arithmetic problems like computing interest. So I suppose a big part of financial literacy has to start from grade school. Okay, so we're also into using a framework of digital banks, where digital banks are not allowed to have more than one branch, so that they'll be forced to be really digital. We have opened up for 6, and the reason we capped it at 6 is that we are actually quite afraid that if there are too many, some of them might actually fall by the wayside, and consumers may lose their trust, and our ability to regulate them may actually be reduced. Now, finally, we are also moving towards an open finance framework. That may take some time, but the entire point, of course, is that the consumer owns the data. And it's up to him whether somebody could see it or not. By the way, it's not that if we have a very good borrower, the tendency of the bank is to keep that a secret because to prevent you from going to another bank. Now, the consumer can actually force the bank to share the data with a competing bank. Okay? So these are I already talked about expanded consumer protection, and we actually have a chatbot where we can deal with consumer concerns in real time via a web chat on the BSP website, via Messenger or Facebook, or via SMS or text. So in the face of increasing digitalization and the importance of protecting consumers from online threats and cyber risks, as I already said, we now have gotten rid of, by the way, I'm also chairman of the Anti-Money Laundering Council, and what we found was that before we did this, making sure that every SIM card has a unique identity of the individual with the right name, with the retina and the fingerprints, we actually found out that there were people who owned, one person owning thousands of SIM cards and actually operating illegal gambling. So these are so finally, because of all these problems, Congress moved and said, okay, from now on, no identity, no verification of identity. Your SIM card will expire in 2 months. In addition, of course, okay, so I think I've got that. Okay, we're of course doing I already said we're doing QR, where wet markets, even wet markets, drivers or pedicabs can actually receive payments through the QR system. We call it Palenque QR. Palenque being actually the Mexican term for market. Okay, most people thought Palenque was Spanish, but it's really Mexican because of our history with Mexico. And a place where many Filipinos now go buy everything. We added a QR. We've already done work with 11 local governments and counting. I actually physically visited 4 of the launches. The feedback is very good, but one thing we noticed is that if the people in the wet market say it's very hard because we're buying vegetables from farmers who do not have access to QR codes, so they still have to go back to their banks to withdraw cash so they can pay the farmers. As you can see, these are the things that have to be addressed because the system becomes less efficient if there are excluded people, and the last mile, like paying the farmer, still has to be cash. So there's so much progress that still has to be done. But in closing, we will continue. In addition, we will continue to work closely with ASEAN counterparts to achieve our financial inclusion goals. As I already mentioned, at the regional level, our cooperative arrangements in ASEAN place us a unique position to engage in knowledge and experience sharing in digital financial inclusion. So let us capitalize on each other's knowledge and cooperate so that we can have a financially inclusive ASEAN for the benefit for all our peoples. Thank you very much for your attention. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Governor Medalla. And that's what we are here for. Thank you very much. Now, we'd like to hear World Bank's findings in here and what your suggestions would be. Therefore, Busatu, the time is yours.
Thank you, Patim. I'm just basically checking whether the PowerPoint presentation is also shown at the background.
Okay. I have a clicker here if you would like to use the clicker and forward it yourself.
If I can tell you, switch the slide.
Oh, here it is.
Okay, here they are. Thank you. Honorable Paperi, the Governor of Bank of Indonesia, and Honorable Central Bank Governor from the Philippines, and Pa Mahendra. Very good to see you again. And selamat sore, everyone. Good afternoon. Pleased to be here with all of you today. I mean, as we heard already, financial inclusion is progressing, but there are still significant challenges in ASEAN to reach where we want to be. In that context, the digital revolution and fintech are playing a big role in advancing and changing basically the situation that we have in terms of access to finance. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the results that we have and data that we have on that. I would like to, can I have the next slide, please? I would like to start by highlighting progress that has been made so far on financial inclusion. And I would like to share with you two pieces of good news. The first good news is that account ownership has been growing. So according to the Global Findex database, account ownership worldwide grew by over 10 percentage points in the past 4 years. This is significant. And in the ASEAN region, the share of adults with a bank account increased from 36% in 2014 to 53% in 2020. If we put that in numbers, that means that additional 117 million additional people got access to a bank account. That's significant. And this growth was very much driven by the adoption of digital financial services. We saw that the share of mobile phone or internet access, or internet the use of mobile phone or internet to access financial services actually increased significantly during that same period. So that basically takes me to the second good news. And the second good news is that the gender gap in account ownership has for the first time in a decade significantly declined. And now in ASEAN, it's 7 percentage points. Lowest ever. 69% of men own bank accounts, 62% women own bank accounts. So much less, the gap is much less than before, but there's still a gap. Now, this progress has been made possible very much by mobile phone accounts. We all have smartphones. So that has basically revolutionized what we are seeing in financial sector. In the case of Indonesia, there are two tech giants, Tokopedia and Gojek. They help to mainstream digital transactions. And linkages after that between the digital platforms and the banks are now basically allowing the increase of account ownership. And also the issuance of national QR code standards. We heard already quite a bit about national QR codes. They also significantly advanced financial inclusion in Indonesia. So today in Indonesia, mobile phone users can transact with 19 million merchants across the country, just using QR codes. It's quite a shift. Next slide, please. So significant progress, but despite this progress, there are still millions of people around the world who are financially excluded. There are almost 1.4 billion people, of whom around 400 million are in ASEAN, who don't have a bank account. And if you look at savings and access to finance, the gap is even wider. But we just focus on the basic, which is the bank account. Now, in the case of ASEAN, in addition to the gender gap that I mentioned before, there are also 6 other key gaps that would need to be addressed to reach equitable financial access. The first one of them is rural-urban gap. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, people living in rural areas are less likely to have access to financial services than those in urban areas. And this is simply because of limited infrastructure, lack of financial literacy, and lack of formal financial institutions. The second is the income gap. Low-income people are often excluded from financial services, either due to a lack of collateral or lack of credit history. The third gap is age gap. And I have to say that I was a little bit surprised when I saw that young people are less likely today to have a bank account than older people. In the case of Indonesia, only 20% of people between 15 and 24 have a bank account, compared to 53% of people aged 25 to 54. It's quite an interesting phenomenon. And then the fourth gap is access to digital financial services, digital services. For example, in Cambodia, only 2% of adults reported using mobile money in 2020. And the fifth gap is the one that also Honorable Perry mentioned. It's basically micro, small, medium enterprises who have very large unmet demand for credit. Globally, it is estimated that that need amounts to over $5 trillion. And the final gap that I want to highlight is basically the cost of sending remittances, which matters for families. While the cost of sending remittances in ASEAN is lower than the average in the world, there are still significant differences between countries. Next slide, please. So, how can then digitalization of financial services help to close these 6 gaps? We are already seeing that fintech is helping to close these gaps by providing both accessible and convenient financial services, even in remote regions. So for example, in Indonesia has made very significant progress in digital financial inclusion. E-wallets and mobile banking have become increasingly popular, in particular in rural areas. And so by leveraging technology, Indonesia has been able to bring financial services to millions of people who didn't have access to those services before. And the Philippines and Vietnam are also making significant progress. But globally, if you look at what is making a difference, it's really those smartphones. It's the mobile money accounts that are increasing access. Globally, in the past 15 years, over 1.3 billion mobile money accounts were registered. And through those accounts, on a daily basis, about $2.7 billion are transacted. So we are talking about big money flowing through to the mobile bank accounts. Interestingly, this started in sub-Saharan Africa. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, there are over 605 million registered mobile bank accounts. Now, let me highlight a few benefits why the fintech is basically, how fintech is benefiting and closing the gaps. Now, what is obvious is that the financial services powered by fintech, they are overcoming the geographical boundaries or geographical challenges. And they are lowering transaction costs by maximizing economies of scale and by using automation and technology. And fintech's power was demonstrated very well during the pandemic. Fintech helped governments to respond more quickly to shocks by facilitating cash transfers to the firms and to people. And at that point, the technologies such as contactless and QR-based payments, together with the digital ID, they allowed basically transactions without the physical contact. That was extremely important, as we all remember, when we remember what happened a couple of years ago. And these fintech innovations have also already helping to narrow the micro, small, and medium enterprise finance gap. So we see that in Indonesia, basically partnerships between banks, the regular banks, conventional banks, and fintechs are already helping to reach these firms. And they leverage alternative credit scoring and digital disbursement technologies. And they're proving to be very powerful. And last but not least, I do want to mention that fintech is also linking with the climate change agenda. And given that we have the governor from the Philippines here, actually one example comes from Philippines. In the Philippines, the government has partnered with mobile network operators to launch a program that enables users to donate disaster relief funds through the mobile phone. And then the government can, in turn, through the fintech, distribute the money. Next slide, please. So, what we have seen is that digitalization has many benefits, and it's fundamentally changing the landscape in the financial sector. But it's important to remember that these changes are also bringing risks. And these risks would need to be managed through policy and through regulation. And let me mention some risks. First of all, there's a cybersecurity risk because fintech companies are vulnerable to cyber attacks. Second risk is financial stability risk because fintech can disrupt the traditional financial system. And then thirdly, there's a consumer protection risk because fintech companies may not be subject to same regulatory requirements as conventional banks. And finally, there's a data privacy risk since fintech companies collect large amounts of personal data. So what this means is that old policy and regulatory frameworks and approaches may no longer be adequate to balance then innovation and risks. And there may be trade-offs that arise between financial stability, efficiency and competition, and privacy and consumer protection. And these trade-offs may evolve as the fintech is expanding and as more users are switching to fintech. So it makes it even more imperative to strengthen the policy frameworks and improve financial infrastructure. And I'm going to come back to that later. So in this context, it's critical that policymakers ensure that their policy frameworks remain fit and proper and flexible. And there's need to be proactive in regulation and supervision of the sector. Next slide, please. So let me say a few words about the World Bank and our support in this area. We in the World Bank, we are committed to support all the ASEAN countries to responsibly harness fintech. So what we see 5 key areas of action to roll out fintech in a responsible manner. Let me mention those quickly. The first area is strengthening institutions. This will entail capacity building for financial sector regulators and modernization of core central bank and financial regulatory functions through technology. The second area is keeping legal, regulatory, and policy frameworks up to date. And that includes data privacy regulations to protect consumers, as well as regulations around cybersecurity and operational risk management. The third one is developing and upgrading financial infrastructure. And that covers many areas, but includes credit reporting systems and digital IDs. And the fourth area is to harness digital financial services for the delivery of public services. It also provides new avenues over there. And the fifth and final is fostering international cooperation and collaboration to address global issues, such as cross-border payments that ASEAN is now spearheading. Next slide, please, and this is my last slide. So let me then close by summarizing the 4 key messages that I want to leave with you. The first is that the financial inclusion has grown tremendously in the past decade. The second message I want to leave with you is that despite this tremendous advance in financial inclusion, gaps remain. Millions of women are still unbanked, and rural-urban gaps in account ownership remain. But the digital financial inclusion of fintech can help to close these gaps and thereby promote financial inclusion, economic activity, and economic growth. So therefore, and that takes to my third message, which is that policymakers and regulators would be well advised to embrace the opportunities presented by fintech and to encourage financial innovation and adoption. But, and there's always a but, and that takes to my final message, which is that fintech cannot be left to market forces, but it will need active regulation and supervision. That is critical to ensure that it does not risk financial stability, integrity, efficiency, reliability of the financial sector, the core values that all of you in central banks hold very close to your heart. Let me stop there. Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih banyak Ibu Satu Kakona. Let's give a round of applause to our speakers. I think we still have around 15 minutes. I hope I could just slip in a few questions here as we're running out of time. Now, thank you very much for the presentations. Also, Pak Mahendra Suregar, who is also still with us online. Now, we know that there's still much to be done, especially gathered from the presentation that we've heard today, that access is still one big thing that needs to be improved. I'm sure a lot of those here also following us online or here present in Bali are from the financial background or banking or financial institutions. And I guess Mahendra and also Governor Medaya, it could be a very stressful moment when you just know that you could do more, but there's just not enough technology or even just access, either access to the services or just coverage or even hardware, and that's not our part. Sometimes we take it that way. Now, if you would share, Pak Mahendra and also Governor, what can ASEAN counterparts do to further push, from the financial sector, further push the other stakeholders into providing that access to hardware, access to coverage, access to service coverage, as that is not our area. But of course, we need to ensure every stakeholder to play their part in this. Probably Mahendra could start. Mahendra.
Thank you, Tim. Well, I think while we can be obviously, for a good reason, impatient to see the growth of the financial inclusion to reach 100% of our population. But I think as I look at the performance of the last 3 years, we are really on the right track, and we should continue undertaking the same rigorous efforts and measures that cover both the hard infrastructure as well as the software, the technology side, the fintech, innovative and creative capacity in promoting the access itself. But at the same time, I think we have to be also, again, lesson learning from the most recent development internationally look at this in a more balanced manner, which otherwise we might take unnecessary and impatient decisions that would result in the risks that we have really witnessed, taken place somewhere else. Fortunately, not within our region of ASEAN. But this is a risk if we only look at one side and not necessarily the whole aspects of the whole ecosystem. So that is one. The second one is that now when we talk about the MSMEs and also to a certain extent the people needs and mobility requirement would also in such a way that need cross-border transactions, smoothness and easiness much better to serve their exports and imports, their transfer of funds, of incomes, and also to finance their trips overseas. And this is where ASEAN integration is very key. I think ASEAN has been quite in the forefront of promoting, among others, the easiness of payment, including the QRIS. And I think that has reached to the MSMEs level, but the coverage from respects of ASEAN need to be improved so that it also provide further financial inclusion to those who are really need in the cross-border transactions of the population that already have the access in the first place, but would like to enhance the utilization of that access for further activities in their daily life and business transactions.
Thank you.
Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Mahendra. Now, I'd like to, how is it in the Philippines, Governor?
Okay, so of course there's every reason to be impatient because even if you go from 70% excluded to say 30 is still a lot.
Yeah.
Now, my own experience is that there are certain that they're profit-oriented, that they do not, they really are very, very mission-oriented. Maybe I should advertise them because maybe one way of rewarding them is to say who they are.
Okay.
There's a group in the Philippines called Card Bank that has, they're essentially run by people who look at inclusion as their main mission. And yet when I talk to them and how excited they are every time they make progress. I don't know if you have met them, the Card Bank people. And I look at the records, the presentation. There's this group called assisted deposits. It turns out they have no cell phones, but they have these people who are embedded in the communities who have cell phones.
Oh.
And they're all sharing the same cell phone. So, and then they even put up a very, very cheap ATM machine.
Wow.
That does not have a cash box and does not, and it's just driven by a tablet.
That's a makeshift ATM machine.
Yeah,
Okay.
makeshift ATM. The thing is, imagine all this. There are actually, there's many things about capitalism, but there are people out there who seem to have missions in life, Of course, they're not losing money, but they're not making tons of money. But they're actually quite happy with everything that they're able to achieve. When I met them, I was so impressed. They were able, such a small group was able to reach something like 15 million people. And they're able to serve half of the people that they serve needed assistance to be able to do electronic. And they have actually workers that actually live in the community and literally rain or shine they're there. And their best equipment is a motorcycle, which can be anywhere. So that's the other thing. That maybe the central bank should also say, okay, a hero of the year.
Okay.
Okay. But we do that now. We call it stakeholders awards. So every year we broadcast them.
You promote them.
We give them beautiful trophies done by national artists. So all those things, and they of course with the BSP there, they usually were able to get media to cover them. So
funding.
So the thing to do is, of course, there are things that we cannot do, but sometimes let's not underestimate what volunteerism and people who care can do.
So I guess this we're touching upon the point of collaboration as well, and that's what we see today in every aspect, in every sector. Now, interesting story there, Governor. But as you've pointed out, that there's also a thought, maybe Busatu, business-wise, it might not be economical to reach to the more rural areas, difficult areas to reach.
But surprisingly, the savings they're mobilizing are within the community. It turns out the community has enough savings. And sometimes they say, oh, you're already saving too much. We're having a hard time placing your money. That's what surprised me. The community, poor as they are, of course, must save because the poor actually know that their income fluctuates, whereas their spending will not.
Yeah.
So therefore, they have savings. And then these people are also very good in financial education. And their advantage is they're really embedded in the community. So the question is the extent to which the central bank can have its regulation to be proportional. Meaning, clearly they're not systemic, so maybe they do not need. We do not apply to them exactly the same regulation that we apply to banks. So all those. So how to make a regulation proportional, so that we do not throw away the baby with the bathwater. That's the other thing we're looking at.
That describes the need and also the willingness of the people. I'm sure if they had the access, they would do so much more, given the access. Now, Busatu, so how are we going to solve this, especially when, as I've stated, maybe the private sector isn't too interested into reaching those areas? There's a need, there's a will, but the numbers aren't great. On the other hand, they have the right for that, for financial inclusion. Does the government have to play in this part as well, have to take charge in here, or how can we push everyone to collaborate and give that access?
Obviously, the government can't force the private sector to go to remote places if they are not going to make a buck, if they're not going to make money. Now, the advantage of fintech is that unlike conventional banking would be very expensive to go to remote villages and establish branches. So that's partly why we see this basically big gaps between rural and urban areas. Fintech, because it's lower cost and it's technology-based, it basically has the potential to break down these barriers and reach some of these remote places. That's actually what we are already seeing in Indonesia. Now, there will always be some places where probably even the most ardent fintechs will not go.
Yeah.
We don't know yet how that is going to play out because, I mean, this is still something that is playing out. But you started by asking Mahendra, the Honorable Governor, is that, you know, what needs to be done also to allow further financial inclusion? I think one basically area that is not under the central bank, but is under the government and under the private sector, is also facilitating digitalization and internet access throughout the whole country.
Yes.
And Honorable Governor actually mentioned it in his basically remarks as well, that's not everything is covered yet. And it's
Yes.
the same in Indonesia, that there are areas that don't have internet, full internet or proper or reliable internet access yet. That's one. And then the other sort of fundamental is digital ID. Actually, all ASEAN countries, but Indonesia have already a digital ID, and Indonesia is now working to introduce it. But it's very, very fundamental to make the fintech markets work. And then we come to regulation. Now, your question, should the government then step in if the private sector doesn't step in? I think that you need to let some time go and see basically how this evolves, and then you will see. But as the Honorable Governor was basically telling us the example, it tells us that innovation will flourish if we allow it to flourish. We just have to then make sure that the risks are within the limits.
Exactly. Interesting, very interesting story there as well. Thank you very much, Ibu Satu. Now, I think I can have one question from the floor. If there is anyone who would like to ask, please raise your hand, and I think we have time for one. Okay, from the right-hand side, if somebody could please leave the mic. Okay.
Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Distinguished guests and panelists. My name is Tessa. I'm CEO and co-founder of Zendit. We're a fintech player, and we focus on enabling businesses to come online by building a digital payment infrastructure in Indonesia, Philippines, as well as Malaysia. My question is to Ibu Satu, or Mbak Satu, I guess, if you don't mind me calling you that as well. I saw there was a lot of conversation about access for women to financial services. What would it take for more women to have access to financial services? That's my question. And specifically to startups like Zendit and other fintech companies, how can we help in ensuring that women have the same access to financial services as men in Indonesia and other parts of Southeast Asia?
Great question. Thank you very much, Tessa. If you may answer, Bu Satu.
No, thank you for that question. It's actually not that easy to make that happen. But one thing that's lacking behind for women is financial literacy. I think it's holding them back significantly from even approaching the financial sector and financial services. So that is one area where very much training, capacity building would be needed, in particular targeted to women's groups. I'm very pleased to hear that you are basically promoting women and helping them to establish then also businesses, because that's what we would like to see. I mean, the female labor force participation is still low in this region, and in particular in Indonesia, and getting women to the labor force, establish businesses, and basically establish bank accounts and financial service, access financial services would be hugely important. But it all starts with understanding what it is, which is the financial literacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tessa, for that question. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I wish I could go through to the regulations aspects and how we advance and regulate that. However, our time is up. Therefore, very interesting points from our speakers today, as we heard from Pak Mahendra and also Governor Medaya and also Bu Satu, that we're on the right track. A lot needs to be done, but at least for Indonesia and Filipina, we see advancements here. Although there are areas that still needs to be focused on. but we see the benefit of this. We need to realize that first. We need to realize what benefit can each country achieve by having everyone included, by financial inclusion. And Pak Peri also pointed out that I would go as far as we would even have better leaders as our women are empowered, as the mothers are empowered, all through across ASEAN, and that's what we would see. Therefore, it should be our focus. It's very timely. We would like to see how technology can bring us further, and also how better regulations are made in advancing and also protecting everyone in this financial inclusion target. Thank you very much to our speakers. Pak Mahendra, thank you very much for your time with us. Pak Mahendra, also, Governor, thank you very much. Governor Medaya, Ibu Satu Kakonan, thank you very much for your time with us. And I'll return the stage to the MC. Thank you very much.
All right, let us give a warm round of applause for all of our speaker and moderator. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today. And now we have finally reached the end of our seminar, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much again for sharing your time with us today. Hopefully today, this afternoon, is an insightful session, an informative session for all of you, as it is for all of us here in Bali. On behalf of the committee, please allow me to sign off, and we will see you again tomorrow on another ASEAN Chairmanship 2023 event. Stay safe and enjoy your rest of evening.